Hey guys, it's the Metroid 5, and it's Halloween! Or, hopefully it is. I'm really behind on this video. While I'm too old to partake in trick-or-treating anymore, I've instead been doing what any other YouTuber does around this time. Making a Halloween special. I've done this in the past with horror-related theories, but this is much bigger. I'm not the best when it comes to scary stuff, as it always puts me on edge, even when I know or suspect it's coming. That's the reason why I'm not a fan of horror games or movies. Even when I first discovered creepypastas by accident back in my early teens, I'd have many nights where I couldn't go to sleep due to the imagery associated with those stories or the music that people play in the background when talking about it. But when you're experiencing something within the horror genre, you kinda know what to expect. Honestly, I find it way creepier when this kind of stuff pops up in places where you'd least expect it. Mainly when you're playing an ordinary and non-scary game and then suddenly something feels off. The tone changes, and you witness something very out of place. That's the reason why Doki Doki Literature Club works so well. It seems like a lighthearted visual novel game, and minus the warning, you would never suspect anything wrong until it becomes a horror game. Whenever something creepy pops up in a non-horror game, whether that be an enemy, a location, or Easter egg, it stands out way more in my mind as being unsettling. And that's what this entire video is about. A list that everybody else has already made. Top 10 creepiest things in non-horror games. I've already laid out the requirements. Anything in the game that comes across as creepy or unsettling to me was eligible. I'm only covering games I've played, and for the most part have made one entry per franchise, but I made an exception for a series with 2 strong cases. And this is ranked based on how creepy I find them. For a warning, things will get pretty messed up near the end of this list, so I hope you wore the brown trousers. Super Mario Galaxy 2. I have so many fun memories of this game, ever since I got it when it came out. First time playing through World 5 and reaching the Shiverburn Galaxy, I had a bit of trouble, but I managed to get through and was interested in fighting King Caliente's successor. But little did I know back then that something was afoot. Something was watching me. You may have already heard of this. In the Shiverburn Galaxy, if you go into first-person view and look at the top of the glaciers, you may see something. A group of silhouettes watching you. And these aren't some coincidental rock formations. They aren't part of the background, as not only are they in a separate file to the background, but if you use first person at later points in the level, you'll see that they change locations. They're following you. You can never go near them, even if you hack the game. And as for their file names, Hell Valley Skytree. The use of the word hell in a Mario game is creepy enough, but it further adds to the mystery of what the hell they are. Granted, Hell Valley relates to the Shiverburn Galaxy's file name, which refers to a location of the same name in Japan that has hot springs and snowy climates, and Sky could just refer to their location, but where does Tree come from? They're clearly designed to look like the typical depiction of aliens, so the thought of having these realistic-looking beings out there in the Mario universe sends shivers down my spine. But from doing research, the tree part could reference Kodamas, a Japanese demon that lives in trees and curses anyone who attempts to cut them down. Yeah, I definitely needed that thought. Ultimately, this Easter egg doesn't creep me out as much as the rest of the list since I didn't learn about it until years later, but it does paint Shiverburn Galaxy in a spooky light. Throughout my entire time on YouTube, there's been a game I've really wanted to talk about. It's a game that I've really liked both from gameplay and, for once, an artistic standpoint, ever since I got it when it first came out. A game I feel is highly underrated and overlooked, and it just so happens that this game relates to this topic. Epic Mickey. For a game starring Mickey Mouse, you'd think it would be all bright and colorful, but then you witness the game's setting. The cartoon wasteland. I was thinking of choosing one location, but then I decided to go with the entire world as what I could say applies everywhere else. For anyone who doesn't know about Epic Mickey, the Cartoon Wasteland is a world created for old and forgotten Disney characters. But Mickey accidentally spilled thinner over it to create its wasteland state before getting trapped in the world himself. The world is like a post-apocalypse for cartoons, as it's mostly barren and desolate from the thinner damage, and many locations in the game almost border on the lines of horror. Early on, you've got the clock tower from It's a Small World that's being driven insane by constantly hearing the song, animatronic recreations of Mickey's friends, Captain Hook being turned into a robot and mechanizing his crew, and the Lonesome Manor, a spooky location in a game where the entire world is already spooky, where the Mad Doctor performs his experiments. That's just to name a few, and not even mentioning the nightmarish, for Disney standards, plot that has generated this chaos after the Finna disaster, and that after Mickey gets sucked in, he's about to be dissected! But I think the symbol for all the unsettling feelings the Wasteland gave me on my first experience would be the statue of Walt Disney that has partially rotted away. You take something that many children idolize, and you put a dark twist on it. That's the entire game in a nutshell, but it's what I think makes the artistic style brilliant. As for why it isn't higher, to be honest, I wasn't that creeped out by the world when I played this as a kid, just unsettled at times, but those feelings still stood out. While it's a game where death is around every corner if you're not careful, Pikmin is quite the lighthearted environment. You got these goofy-looking characters and enemies, these cute-looking slaves, and bright environments with ambient music. What could possibly be creepy here? That's what you say until you remember the submerged castle exists. This dungeon. Never have I ever been so frightened to even go near the entrance of a dungeon, let alone explore it. Except this one. In Pikmin 2, there are many dungeons containing treasures, and while they all look the same for the most part visually, the submerged castle uses its own style of ambience and one other thing to make it the most traumatic experience for most Pikmin players. The entrance to this place is in a body of water, meaning that you can only enter with blue Pikmin. This doesn't seem so bad. Sure, they may throw other hazards at you, but you can work around them. You even get Boltman. But then you have the option to leave this place on the very first floor. That's your sign that something's not right. The music used in this place is extremely nerve-wracking. For me, it makes my heart constantly beat fast and extremely jumpy to even the tiniest oddities, cutscenes, or text boxes that pop up, because I know, in those cases, there is a possibility that it will appear. Meet the Water Wraith! Starting at floor 2, if you take too long to head downwards, this thing will appear and chase after you. This enemy is invincible, unless you have purple Pikmin, which you can't bring in. It also acts like a steamroller, and as such, touching it is instant death to any Pikmin. Due to the narrow corridors that make up the submerged castle, if this thing shows up, you're going to run into it. And when you do, it will hunt you down faster than Liam Neeson. Getting through this place just got infinitely harder. Thankfully, on the final floor, you get purple Pikmin and are able to get payback, but that doesn't remove the level of stress and horror that came before. On my first playthrough of Pikmin 2, I was a lucky git, and didn't get the Water Wraith until the penultimate floor when I was mostly finished. But still, throughout the whole dungeon, I was on edge and a nervous wreck as I feared for when the Water Wraith would show up, and the music just amplified that. Metroid does have a number of creepy stuff across the series, so you might consider this as being ineligible for the list, but it still isn't classed as a horror game, so I still count it. Amongst all of the creepy things present in Metroid, very few ever affected me. But there's one that's always stood out as a strong exception, and I think the same applies to many other Metroid players. The SAX. Starting off, this thing's introduction is already creepy enough as it zooms in on its zombie-like face with blank eyes. But more of the reason why the SAX is so scary is because it's essentially a deadlier water wraith. The plot of Metroid Fusion has Samus's power suit become infected by an X-parasite, and thus her having to be injected with Metroid DNA and use the much frailer fusion suit. With X-parasite's abilities to mimic the appearance and abilities of their host, this parasite copies the power suit, and thus some of her upgrades from Super Metroid. Within Samus's current state, the SAX is effectively invincible for most of the game. The only form of defense being to very briefly freeze it with ice missiles. There's numerous cases where you have to hide from this thing while the tension is cranked up to the max thanks to the music and sound effects, totally not making anyone nervous there, but then there are times where the SAX will always spot you. Even one case where the game drops you right in front of it. Then you have to use the Joestar technique of running away and do it as fast as you can, because if it catches you, or if you decide to fight it for some reason, it will kill you. In the running away sections, the music now becomes incredibly frantic to make you even more of a panicking mess, and there are times where you'll need to carefully platform or stop and use power bombs to proceed, which is extremely hard to do when you're trying to move as fast as you can. By the time you get to properly fight this thing, where it turns into this, just like the water wraith, it doesn't erase all the horrifying stress you went through prior. At least by the end, you never have to see it again. Few things have ever creeped me out in the Legend of Zelda series. Of course, there's the terrifying scene from Twilight Princess, the Lost Woods in Breath of the Wild, and the entirety of Majora's Mask, but neither of those compare to how freaked out I was by what lies hidden in Ocarina of Time. You're playing the game, everything's going mostly fine, and then you reach the lead up to the Shadow Temple. In order to enter the Shadow Temple, you need the Lens of Truth, which is located at the bottom of the well in Kakariko Village. The well is pretty creepy at first, but not that different to what came before. But upon reaching the end, you find these hands sticking out of the floor, and when one grabs you, Dead Hand appears. Dead Hand is the most disturbing mini-boss to ever appear in the Zelda series. It is a zombie-like creature that appears to be covered in blood, or maybe that's rotting flesh, you let your imagination decide, with an extremely fucked up face and arms that are more like tentacles. This abomination to mankind rises out of the ground and will proceed to bite Link when he's vulnerable. Luckily you can break free and fight back, but you still have to deal with the hands, which by the way are part of his body. If you're close to a hand while you're attacking it, you will be grabbed and have to wriggle out before it can perform a counterattack. You can kill the hands, but then they'll grow back about 20 seconds later, so Dead Hand is like one of those horror movie monsters that constantly heals itself. Even being near the thing when it emerges and submerges hurts you. Granted, Dead Hand isn't a hard boss. He's pretty easy actually, but it's his appearance combined with the way in which he fights you that makes this the stuff of nightmares. While I don't expect to have difficulty when facing Dead Hand, I still somewhat panic when caught in the hands as I try to rotate the analog stick and mash the D-pad as much as possible before he can reach me. I remember being scared so much just by the sight of the hands. However, it gets worse. He reappears as the mini-boss of the Shadow Temple. Although it's even easier, you still have to relive the whole experience. And if you're playing on Master Quest, you fight him a third time! Thank God I never played that mode. You know, Pokemon is seen as being a super kid-friendly series with its colorful monsters, child protagonists, and some people who question why grown-ups play the series. So why does it have so much horrifying shit in it? Almost every mainline Pokemon game has one really scary thing in it, all the way back to the beginning with Lavender Town, up to the Ghost Girl in X and Y. And don't get me started on the Pokedex entries. But for me, out of all those cases, the creepiest thing in Pokemon would have to be the Strange House from Black and White 2. One of the new locations added in Black and White 2, exploring the Strange House in my first playthrough has got to be the most on edge and jumpy I have ever felt playing a creepy area in Pokemon. I kept having this thought in the back of my mind that there may be a jump scare, even if that's out of Pokemon's taste for once. The house is structured in a maze-like fashion as many pieces of furniture have been moved around to block your path, forcing you to take the long way around, meaning I had to stay in this location longer. And when the music is this disturbing, it just further adds to how jumpy this made me. There's an item located in an awkward spot between two bits of furniture which I tried to get, but didn't know how, and I was so nervous at this point I was just like, fuck it, and left it behind. But that's not even the most messed up thing about this place. Yeah, this place is haunted. At several points while exploring the house, the ghost of a young girl will pop up and talk about the lunar wing that is found here. This ghost girl actually appeared in Black and White 1 very briefly on the Marvelous Bridge. What makes this ghost stand out to the others is that she's given the most backstory, which results in some disturbing implications. The girl will also mention a dark dream and her family, including an Abra, with her waiting on the Marvelous Bridge to return the wing to the Pokemon. Obviously this Pokemon is Cresselia, but the Luna Wing's lore states it is a dream catcher, specifically designed to counter Darkrai's nightmares. I've seen some theories speculating that the girl's Abra, or maybe even her parents, were sent into a horrific nightmare by Darkrai, and that she tried to use the Luna Wing to save them. Now, of course, it's just a theory, and the backstory of this place has never been revealed, but based on that idea and what's present there, something very unpleasant happened here. Now we go back to the franchise that got 2 entries on this list, Mario. Yes, frickin' Mario has 2 very strong cases of creep factor that made me make an exception to the usual rule. This one in particular, as it really freaked me out as a kid. Super Paper Mario is considered the awkward stepchild of the series as it was a platformer rather than an RPG, and while it received a more positive fan reception later on, I've always liked this game, mainly because it was the first one I played, plus in my older years because the plot is really dark for a Mario game. Super Paper Mario's story has the antagonist, Count Bleck, attempting to destroy all worlds with the Void. When reaching the 6th world in the game, the Samur Kingdom, the Void here is considerably larger than any seen before. Unfortunately, Mario is unable to complete the Duel of 100 fast enough and the world is consumed by the Void. However, upon being kicked out, the door to the world is still available. And what do you find? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. The entire Samur Kingdom has been wiped from existence. All of its inhabitants presumably dead, and all that remains is a vast, empty world of just a white background and a few small remains of the architecture seen before. This is a Mario game that effectively depicts the apocalypse and the aftermath. This section of the game is pretty tedious since you have to walk an incredibly long distance with little in the way, but that gives you plenty of time to take in the, once again, creepy and disturbing music that plays in the background throughout this place. There's even what sounds like a heart rate monitor flatlining at one point, which further emphasizes everybody being erased. When I got to this part as a kid, I wasn't expecting a pretty sight when going back through that door, and even then I was still disturbed by what I found. I think this was the first time I had ever experienced such a huge emotional impact in a game. Until you beat the game, you can even go back to the world of nothing and still see the destruction. Then you realize that this is what Count Bleck plans to do with every other world in existence, and the thoughts get even more unsettling. For once, it's a relief to see Mr. L. His cool and funky music gives me the mood whiplash I needed. And this isn't the only creepy part of the game. For a series that involves murder in every case, Ace Attorney is very tame when it comes to any potential disturbing details, offering a generally more comedic approach, so you might not expect anything creepy here, but everything changes with Turnabout for Tomorrow. The exact setup behind the case isn't creepy, but the details discussed certainly are. Turnabout for Tomorrow deals with the 7-year-old incident in which Athena's mum was murdered by an international spy known as the Phantom. But at the time, prosecutor Simon Blackquill was convicted. Relating to a similar case in the present day, Blackwill's sister Aura forces the case to reopen in order to clear her brother's name, whilst making Athena the prime suspect in her own mother's death. During the scenario where Athena is considered the only other possible culprit, Edgeworth proclaims some very messed up details when it comes to Athena's potential motives and what he believes happened at the scene of the crime. Athena's mum was known to use her in experiments. In reality, this was done to help with Athena's sensitive hearing, but is used to suggest that Athena killed her mum because she was constantly used as a guinea pig, which is already disturbing enough, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. Due to spending her entire childhood in the Space Center, Athena couldn't tell the difference between humans and robots when it came to injuries. In the robotics lab where Metis was murdered, there is an operating table used to dismantle and reassemble broken robots. Athena's childhood innocence when it came to this detail leads to the most gruesome concept in an Ace Attorney game. After Metis was murdered by the Phantom, Athena had her body moved to the operating table in an attempt to fix her. Athena was going to mechanize her mother's corpse by dismantling and reassembling it. And when you see how the operating table works in the investigations, you can see it's definitely not suitable for use on humans. Even Phoenix is horrified at the thought of it. Dual Destinies is the only Ace Attorney game to receive an M rating in America, and this is why. But the thing that freaked me out the most about this on my first playthrough is Blackwill's cross-examination when he reveals what he saw upon entering the room. Within the comics, Batman has had a countless number of dark, graphic, and unsettling storylines. So again, this may seem like a stretch, but the Arkham games aren't classed as horror. Arkham Knight is the only game in its series to receive an M rating, 18 in Europe. This is due to the Jason Todd torture scenes, but I think there's another part of the game that resulted in this rating. The perfect crime. This side quest in Arkham Knight is pretty much scarred into my brain when I think about this game just because of how twisted the subject matter is, and it kind of makes me regret beating this game 100% the first time. The side quest opens up when the police inform Batman of a dead body left on display in Gotham City. Batman investigates, where during the course of the game, more and more of these bodies are reported. However, there's a similar pattern between all of them. On top of all having derogatory names spray painted next to them, they all have some sort of abnormality, for lack of a better word. Things such as birth defects, injuries, surgical procedures, even a shark bite at one point. They were also all reported missing outside of Gotham City and in locations where the Circus of Strange was performing. Batman is able to track down the ringmaster of the circus, Laszlo Valentine, aka Professor Pig, an obscure villain from the comics, where it's revealed that he has been kidnapping all of these people to try and fix them by removing their imperfections. The dead bodies were those who died during his process, and as for the unlucky survivors, their bodies have been mutilated by not only removing the imperfections, but also removing all sexual body parts and covering their faces with masks to become genderless, mindless puppets known as Dollatrons. The Dollatrons, combined with Pig's psychotic god complex, scared the hell out of me when I first played this game, because not only does Pig himself come across as super creepy, especially with this being the first time I ever heard of him, but the Dollatrons might as well be zombies that follow Pig's every command. I dread to think the exact explicit details of what Pig did to them to make them like this. You even see him in the middle of converting someone into a Dollatron. But probably the most terrifying aspect of the Dollatrons is that upon Pig being locked up in the GCPD, a bunch of Dollatrons are placed in their own cell. If you use detective vision here, you'll see that the Dollatron status is terrified. Seems like they still have their own sense of thought and are scared at remembering what happened to them. I'm kind of cheating here because this is a game I've played, but never beaten. And the thing in question doesn't really come into play until the end of the game. But for me, I couldn't think of anything I found creepier in a non-horror game, so I just went with it. This thing has appeared on many similar lists, and even during my time first discovering creepypastas, I'd seen this thing's face associated with them so much that for a time I would see it whenever I closed my eyes. Gygas in Earthbound. Earthbound is presented as such a charming, fun, and warm adventure reflecting everyday life, so upon reaching Gygas at the end, all of that is thrown out the window for sheer horror. Gygas is the main antagonist of the game, and an alien being that previously arrived on Earth as a baby and was raised by George and Maria, the grandparents of Ninten, the protagonist of Earthbound Beginnings, but then became crazy and decided to conquer the world. In the future, Gygas pretty much succeeds in his goal and brings Earth to total destruction, all Terminator style. But also in Terminator style, a warrior named Buzz is sent back in time to set Ness and his friends off on their adventure to stop Gygas before the future events. From here, many forms of life like people, animals, plants, and even inanimate objects have been corrupted and made evil by Gygas' influence, along with his army of robots. This builds up Gygas to be such a threat. That doesn't prepare you for the final boss battle against him in the far past, where, for one, it takes place in a room that looks like someone's intestines, but after the first phase, you get to see Gygas' true form. This horrifying, screaming face. Gygas has no physical form, and instead possesses more of a ghost-like presence. Even as you proceed to kill him through Paula's praying, the fight just gets more and more demented as he goes all staticky, and the image of him just repeats across the screen. Even his dialogue during the battle sounds like a creepy, deluded person. Now this takes me to where the inspiration for Gygas came from, which, after his appearance, I believe to be the creepiest thing about him. Shigesato Itoi, the creator of Earthbound, has stated that the idea for Gygas came from an incident when he was a child in which he walked into the wrong movie screen and saw an adult movie called The Military Policeman and the Dismembered Beauty. Specifically, he saw a sex scene that's followed by a murder. Itoi misinterpreted this as a rape scene, and all the messed up thoughts that went through his head as a kid because of this resulted in the concept for Gygas and his dialogue. Gygas is a being that wants to be loved, but can't due to his own messed up thoughts. There's even a popular theory that Gygas is really an aborted fetus, which coincides with his concept. Granted, that theory's been disproven, but the fact that there was so much evidence and correlation between the idea and Gygas' concept just makes him seem all the more creepier to me, even if it's not true. And Earthbound is a Nintendo game! Again, what's this about Nintendo being just for kids? I need something to lift my spirits. His name's Pooh.